Oh, thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Nick, founder of People.io. There's some slides in here that I write my presentation just before I do it. So there might be some stuff that I forget. But I was actually doing most of this presentation a couple of weeks ago in Russia. And halfway through the presentation, on stage in front of a room full of people, was thinking about, okay, I'm talking about misuse of data, AI, advertising on stage in Moscow. Will I escape? Probably not. But here I am. So the problem we're solving and really trying to approach is that at the moment, companies want data and people need control. And now this is kind of an investor-ready problem statement, because I don't really believe it. So companies don't want data, they want money, and sales teams have just convinced them they want data. And people do need control. I actually think people want control, they just don't know why. So this is kind of the investor-ready version. But the reason they need control in the short term is because of this. The Martech Lumascape, I'm sure you've all seen it. There was a new version released the other day. Someone, I think Jeremy Wade from IBM, just posted it on LinkedIn the other day. 6,500 companies now, all hoovering up your data to try and create this, the holy grail of marketing, that unified view of the consumer, where you take data from across a person's life, their behaviors, their activities, their web browsing habits, and compile it all into this single view of the individual. Very similar to this, in fact, that brings in user activity, email data, behavior, etc. And the difference between the two is that the first one is a product sold by the likes of Adobe, where they bring in George Clooney to take a break from selling Nespresso machines, to convince you to buy a DMP for $50 million that you then have to fill with data of your customers. The second is the NSA in prison. And that's quite scary. That actually the advertising industry, as we've started to see, has, in most cases, more data than intelligence services. And the places that data gets collected are places like this wholly anonymized website that you'd never guess. On the right-hand side, there's the plugin Ghostery that a lot of people have become familiar with because of the recent revelations. But on this website, there's 84 different companies tracking you. Wi-Fi. If you're not the product, if you're not paying, you are the product. So when you use Wi-Fi, don't think it's free. There's always that cost. The data's being collected. Back in 2012, Schrems, who was a precursor to Safe Harbor being thrown out in GDPR, did a subject access request to Facebook, and after the fourth attempt, Facebook returned 1,200 pages of data on him in 57 different categories. That was in 2012, when Pokes was still a thing on Facebook. But it gets scarier, because a few years ago, I'm sure you remember in the States, they were called into court because they were doing psychoanalysis of users in the timeline, around 1,000 users. They were told they had to stop that. So then they introduced reactions. So now Facebook effectively knows whether you're happy, whether you're sad, and how to make you emotional. But what's scary about that is that same data has already been used without the reactions in Australia, where they compiled effectively a psychometric report on teenagers to understand when they feel the most vulnerable, because that was determined as being a good opportunity for advertisers to pounce. When you look at Facebook new messenger product for kids, you think this is all great, it's a safe environment for kids to come in and do all these exciting things, and the AI and deep learning networks can sit on top of your face when you're putting all those filters over yourself, very similar to Snapchat, except what you don't realize is creating a biometric mesh on top of your face, which is your personal identity, and actually tells that company whether you're happy, whether you're sad, who you're with, where you are, what you're doing, your state of mind. And that has already been proven in Russia, where vKontakte was used as an open API to effectively track people in a country just by picking up a photo. And in fact, Facebook, again, is in court for a number of reasons, but in the States, are in court for their use of facial recognition software to build networks, social networks on top of images, where they can determine who you're connected to without you even telling them, just by seeing who else's face is in the photo, the context of the photo, whether you're happy or sad with them, whether you're in the office, whether you're on holiday. All of that is going on without you realizing. And then even with Tinder, who were ousted recently as having 800 pages of data on every single user in the app. Google, who accidentally record you without you realizing through Google Home and claim it was an engineering accident until you look back a few years when they were also doing the same with their Street View cars, picking up all that Wi-Fi data. And then lovely startups and apps like this that have SDKs they embed in third-party apps, that when you give that app permission to access your photo roll, this SDK just goes and analyzes your entire photo set on your phone and uploads the data into the advertising plan. And they all rely on the fact that people don't read terms and conditions. And the simple reality is that actually, even if you did read them, would you understand it? Would you give a shit? Probably not. And that's what the advertising industry relies on. And that's what a lot of tech companies that need data rely on. The arguments that, like, I used to work in WPP. Boo. And a lot of the time you would hear these nonsensical arguments in the agency world, and they still exist. I'm just on the other side of it now. Things like consumers don't care about their data. It helps us make advertising more relevant. And the best one is, well, it's anonymous. Like, who cared about their data anyway? And that's like a massive fail, because no one in the industry actually believes it's anonymous. It's just what you tell the lawyers to make sure that no one gets on your back. But look at it from a commercial point of view as well. So if that's from a consumer point of view, you're kind of all screwed. But from a business point of view, 18 years ago, Bezos and Borders doing their deal, we'll deliver your books for you. You just bring all of your logistics to us, we'll handle it for you. 2011, Borders goes bust, Amazon stock price booms through the roof. Facebook, 6 years ago, going to brands, hey, we've got 1 billion users, don't worry about sending users to your .com site, we'll do all of that for you, and then bang, organic reach falls through the floor. Amazon, why don't you sell all your products through us? Oh wait, hold on, we've got Amazon Echo now, and we're going to analyse the text of all the reviews on your products that you're selling through us to make the perfect own brand product that we'll then prioritise on Amazon Echo. Google Home doing voice analysis, and then the likes of Facebook Messenger that are trying to keep brands hooked in there, but you don't own the relationship. So actually, as a consumer, you're being screwed because you're giving all your data to the advertisers and the brands. And now the advertisers and the brands are being screwed because they're too dumb to realise what's actually going on in front of them. And then they sit there and get all surprised. So, briefly, these are the people we focus on. So, the biggest problem in getting people to take ownership of their data is people simply don't give a shit. Like, if you walk up to someone in the street and say, hey, would you like to take control of your data? They go, no, I don't care. My Uber's cheaper, or I get to talk to my friends. There isn't enough perceived value in constantly having control of data. So people like this, 18 to 25-year-olds, surprisingly, they've got more common sense than the entire industry combined. And so in our team, we've got someone with, well, we've got a few people with PhDs, but specifically one that does neuropsychology, and we did user research and found the way you get an 18 to 25-year-old to do something, surprise, surprise, you pay them. Yes, you need a PhD to work that out. So we built an app designed for 18 to 25s where the user downloads the app. They provide a clear and unambiguous consent where we point out to them, we never sell the data, you own the data, and if you leave, we delete the data. Then we ask them to enable location services, notifications, and 90% of our users enable their location in the background with the GPS. Why? Because they get paid, pretty simple. Then we start to ask them questions, really simple swipe card questions. Again, it took someone with a PhD to work out that actually millennials like swiping questions instead of doing multi-choice. There's also a lot of science around the quality of data you can get, but importantly, when users answer the questions, every time they answer a question, they get paid. So now they start to understand a very clear transactional value associated to that data. And after a second or third use of the app, they have the option to connect external data. So a lot of our users have connected their Gmail account or Spotify account, etc. And when they connect that data, they also get paid. Now, from a marketer's point of view, you might go, hold on a minute. You've now got first-party, identifiable, declared and observed data at a hyper-low latency with full verifiability. How interesting. That seems like a legal nightmare. Well, surprisingly, because the user's in control, owns it, and we're not selling it to you, it's actually the perfect solution. So we now connect brands with those users in the app, and in fact, when the user sees an advert, they also, surprisingly, get paid. So for a user that previously didn't give two shits about their data, we've now got something there where they go, all right, so there's actually some value here, all right, I'll do that. The long term of this is actually that it becomes like the Visa or the MasterCard of data, because now, from that really simple app experience, you can see we've started connecting some of the most critical data from across that person's life into a unified view that can now become the passport or the digital identity of that person across every ecosystem. But does it work? Well, since we launched in February last year, 103 million questions answered in the app, 98% view completion. That's not Facebook's 3 seconds, that's 100% of the video asset, 98% of the time. 15 to 30% click-through rates, loads of people like it. We're trending in the App Store just above Love Island, which is pretty cool, just below Tinder, which is disappointing. Named NASDAQ Rising Star, loads of good press coverage. First wire startup to launch branded Telefonica product in Germany, strictest data privacy market in the world. Do a load of advisory work for the government on a whole load of different stuff. So you might think, wow, awesome, great, data is sold. Let's go home. No, unfortunately there is a downside to the future. So here's the future. I'm sure you have all read Data is the New Oil. You would have thought The Economist, with a big fancy title like that, would have worked out that oil is finite, data is infinite. So surely the general principles cannot apply. So data is not the new oil. And the way that you need to kind of think about this in order to truly understand it is first thinking about data and where it comes from in a slightly different way. So in the world of data in companies and business and law, you generally have first and third party data, and second party data is this kind of ambiguous thing. So first party data, a lot of the time if you work in a company, you would argue first party data is your data as a company. Wrong. First party data is not your data as a company. The best way to describe that is through Brooklyn Beckham. I used to use Justin Bieber, a little too controversial. So, imagine Brooklyn Beckham is taking a picture of himself. He's taking a selfie of himself. And he is the only person in that image. Now, he owns the device. He is the one taking the photo. So he kind of owns the mechanical rights to that image. If it's only got his face in it, it's only his likeness, his intellectual property, he owns that part of it as well. So for all intents and purposes, he owns all of the rights to that image. That's what first-party data should be, surely. You've created it, it's about you, it's on your device, why the hell don't you own it? Now, if a company wants to go and use that data, third-party, think of it like Getty Images. You're a company, you want to use that data for a commercial purpose, you go to a third party and say, I need X, Y, and Z, here's the license that I will take it under, here's what I'll pay you, here's the conditions associated to its use. That all seems pretty easy, good, and well. It gets more complicated though, second-party data. So my personal view of what second-party data is, bear in mind I have no education and often try to pass myself off as a lawyer. Second-party data to me is like the resulting intelligence that comes from the combination of first and third party, and this is where the AI side really starts to come into it. So about 2 years ago, Google DeepMind made this announcement, basically showing that they could take an image and they could annotate and add the metadata and text description to the image entirely automatically. So all of that text is done by an AI. Now you look at that and go, oh, that's quite simple, that's basic. Then you start to think, oh shit, all my images are on Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, iCloud, all of those services. Apple, by the way, disabled their facial recognition feature a couple of years ago because it freaked out users. Doesn't mean they're not still doing it. So all of this is going on your content. How do you think DeepMind just became a better lip reader than a human? It's because you added closed captions onto your YouTube videos that you uploaded that then trained their models to enable it to do it. And that's where it gets a little scary, because the traditional model of a data controller and a data processor, for those that like getting bored by the legal meanings here, so a data subject is you and me. A data controller would be someone like the Royal Mail, and a data processor in a traditional world would be someone like Domino's Pizza. So Domino's wants to go and send a load of direct marketing. They go to the Royal Mail, buy a database, send it out, and then delete the data. Job done. Controller gets the value, controls the data, processor processes, done. Problem in the modern society with artificial intelligence is that AI retains data and intelligence. Even if you delete the source data, it still has residual intelligence. So if you were to take something like DeepMind that got all of that data from the NHS a little while ago, NHS gave 2 million patient records to DeepMind. So if the value of an AI is largely determined by how intelligent it is, and its intelligence comes from the data it trains itself on, let's take this example. So NHS gave that data to DeepMind, so DeepMind might now be $50 million more valuable. And in 5 years' time, it cures cancer in part because of that data, so now it's $100 million more valuable. They sell the cure to a pharmaceutical company for $500 million, who sell it back to the NHS for $1 billion. Who pays for the NHS? It's you. You created the data. But actually, because you were split from that data, and because it was anonymized, and because of the whole way that this controller processor mechanism works right now, you have lost that value. And that becomes a big issue, but a lot of the time, brands are the people that are causing the problems, because all of these tracking pixels that you've got on your website, when you go into a bank, I was in with one of the banks a couple of months ago, they're so scared Facebook is going to kill them. Facebook's already got a money license and they're applying for a European banking license. And the bank's like, oh my God, they're going to kill us. And yet the marketing team have got Facebook tracking pixels on their homepage. So as soon as someone clicks log in, Facebook knows who your customer is. Used to work on the Ford business. And they were scared to death that Apple and Google were going to create their own autonomous cars and bake their own systems into those vehicles. So they threw them out of the cars, but oh wait, this is the German Volkswagen website that actually has 43 trackers on it. So all of the data that you're most worried about other companies getting, they're giving away. And they're doing it because they make the argument it's anonymous data and it can't affect us. Now the problem is that AI never cared about your name anyway. AI doesn't wake up and go, oh hey, I wonder where Nick is today. No. You are the numeric identifier that the advertising industry right now, for the sake of your benefit to do some weird and wonderful retargeting, claims to be anonymous. That is the ignorance that will kill the industry. So let's take this. I'm sure you've all seen this.
Welcome to the world's first artificially intelligent operating system. We'd like to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Are you social or antisocial?
I guess I haven't been social in a while.
How would you describe your relationship with your mother? Thank you. Please wait as your operating system is initiated.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha.
Good morning, Theodore.
Morning.
You have a meeting in 5 minutes. You want to try getting out of bed?
You're too funny.
Okay, good. I'm funny. I want to learn everything about everything.
I love the way you look at the world.
How long before you're ready to date?
What do you mean?
I saw in your emails that you'd gone through a breakup.
Well, you're kind of nosy.
So what was it like being married?
There's something that feels so good about sharing your life with somebody.
How do you share your life with somebody?
So it's a film called Her. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Joaquin Phoenix, I think, falls in love with an artificial intelligence. And the reason he falls in love with the AI is because the AI knows more about him than he knows about himself, and is therefore able to effectively create situations and understand him enough to elicit an effect or a response. So to best demonstrate that, bounce castles. So I don't want to buy a bouncy castle. Haven't got space for it. I kind of do want one, but I haven't got space for it. But let's assume I don't want one. Holy grail of marketing would effectively be to say, you as a marketer can convince me to buy this bouncy castle. And with all of the data everyone is running around as marketers trying to collect, your goal in life is to sell more of them. So long as you're not selling alcohol, tobacco, or sugary products these days, there's no real line of ethics. You can convince anyone to buy a bouncy castle, there's no line there. So now, provided you've got an AI with enough data or enough training to know more about me than I know about myself in the way that you add multivariate messaging, etc., you now choose whether I buy this bouncy castle or not. That isn't a challenge to get me to buy one, because I really don't want one. But if you also think about the example we gave earlier with Tinder. So Tinder, with 800 pages of data on you, that feature that chooses which photos should be shown to other people that performs the best, and that's a really scary starting point, because suddenly that really happy film Her is actually Minority Report. There is no difference in it. Aside from the fact Jaron Lanier, who coined the phrase virtual reality, came up with 90% of the concepts for this, and he's written the book Who Owns the Future, and it's pretty bleak. But to make it slightly more bleak, let's talk about fridges in the desert, and I'll wrap up shortly. So the reason Her and Minority Report have the same kind of narrative, but one is happy, one is sad, is because it's perception of what is good and bad. Perception of good and bad is relative. Your belief of right and wrong is relative. A fridge is only cold if it's hot outside. And that's a really interesting challenge in a world of AI, because actually you no longer control what is good and what is bad. Someone is making that decision for you, and you are now choosing whether you want to partake in that environment. And so consent, in many respects, is dead, because consent and GDPR, which kind of is the future of the past in many respects, a big part of that is a user's consent. But how, if the smartest people in the world, I'm sure you saw a little while ago, I think it was Google created a couple of chatbots that were talking to each other, and they created their own language. And they had to shut it off because they had no idea it was going to do it. How, if the smartest people in the world can't predict that happening, how are you as a consumer that's consenting to the collection of your data that requires it to be unambiguous such that you understand what is going to happen to that data during its processing? How, if the smartest people in the world don't understand the potential outcome of an AI from the data that's being put into it, how are you as a consumer ever going to understand that? It's impossible. because there's an infinite number of permutations of possible outcomes. But more importantly, if you take that example with DeepMind and the training and that residual knowledge, if in 5 years' time you can walk into a room and Watson, just by looking at your face, knows you have a heart disease because of the way it's trained itself and the models it's built from the training data, who now decides whether Watson tells you you've got a heart disease? And the problem there is the Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, not save the world. But let's assume for a moment Watson does have to tell you. When does Watson have to tell you? Does Watson tell you now, while you're at an event? Or does it wait 3 hours until you're home with friends and family? Now that's a paradox, because you can't tell Watson to tell you unless you first know that Watson knows, but if you know Watson knows, then you don't need to tell Watson because you already know the same that Watson knows. So you've got a paradox. You can't now have control over the effect of the intelligence that's resulted from your data. So actually, you have to rely on the ethics and the morality of these big 6 tech companies to ensure that you retain the freedoms in your life. And when it comes back to creativity, creativity is a big, happy world. I used to, when I was in WPP, I reported into the chief creative officer on the Ford business, and he was fascinating. And he always believed creativity was the end result of like this process. And here, one of the definitions on Google is phenomenon whereby something new and somehow valuable is formed. Well, new, again, is relative. Because if you've got different groups of people, and they each create something, but there's no connection between those people, they perceive it to be new, and therefore they perceive it, in theory, to be creative and of value. But what happens, to Tom's earlier point, if it's actually an AI that already has all of those permutations, that already knows all of those different things? Does creativity now change from being you as a creator, creating something and distributing it to the world? Does it now not make you a person that has to manufacture the discovery of something that already exists? Because AI already has everything. So as a creator, do you not now need to actually work out how to help someone discover something that already exists? And bear in mind, AI is only the start. When you get to quantum and you have kind of everything, nothing, and everything together with nothing, like, that's basically stateless, and everything exists in multiple forms, and like it's an impossible task. But that's a kind of interesting dilemma, because as creatives, you then fall into an ethical dilemma. Because personalization is great, manipulation is bad. Netflix, biggest competitor, they say, is sleep. Kind of fun, except for the fact then you realize they're using data to create creative, scripted narrative content that is addictive, because their business model requires you to be on there. Virtual reality creates an environment where you cannot possibly perceive all of the things that will shift what you believe to be the right and wrong thing to do, and the environment where you make a decision. You, as a human, lose control as a result of the creative environment you have been put into. And so I'll leave you with a final point about fridges. I've got a thing for fridges. So in 5 years' time, if the quality of your fridge is not determined by how cold it keeps food, but by the quality of your algorithm that orders the food, how do you advertise to that fridge? Kind of tricky. Because actually, you're not going to plug your fridge into Facebook so it can order food based on the brand videos you liked on Facebook. It doesn't work. You're not going to plug it into a DMP so it orders food based on 50,000 other aggregate anonymized audiences, are you? It needs to know about you. It needs your data. How much money you've got, the calendar, where you're going, whether your friends are coming around, how stressed you are, how energetic you are, whether you've been to the gym. And at that point, when the fridge is ordering food like that, what is the role of creativity? Because if creativity in advertising is to elicit a response or an action or getting that person to go and do something, if the fridge is already doing it for them, what good does your content have anyway? Your Instagram post and your short form video and your long form film and your brand placement means nothing, because that person's not ordering the food anyway. Actually, you have to fall back in many respects onto the principles of the attention economy and buying that person's time and delivering a rewarding experience that may be so good they choose to override something that is otherwise already being done. So I promised that I wouldn't leave without kind of you having lots of questions in your mind. So I'd love to chat with you all after, but that's kind of our big vision.